The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
Georgia's GDP per capita will increase by $533 compared to the previous year, according to an updated World Economic Outlook for Georgia by the International Monetary Fund. With the indicator, Georgia is on the 106th place among the 196 countries in the world. At the same time, according to the IMF, in 2022, Georgia's GDP per capita will increase by another $489 and it will reach $5,297. What is the main emphasis of the current IMF World Economic Outlook for Georgia, and how can this country improve its economic performance? Jihad Azour from the IMF answered this and more questions in our exclusive interview.
A very interesting emphasis in this current outlook is the emphasis on the labor markets and also the role of informality. According to Geostat, we can see that informality level in non-agricultural sectors in Georgia is about 32%. What are some main findings in the outlook on Georgia specifically, and where does Georgia stand regionally if we look at the level of informal economy in the region?
Well, this year we put the focus on two key areas to understand the impact of the crisis and also to see how countries could recover. And the two areas were labor market impact as well as also the impact of the crisis on the corporate sector. And in both cases, the analysis is showing that the crisis had a big toll on labor, especially on vulnerable groups, those who are in the informal economy. Usually, the informal sector constitute a kind of a buffer during crisis. This time, because of the nature of the COVID crisis and because it affected certain number of high-intensive contact sectors, impact on I would say informality was high. Going forward, what would help is accelerate growth, address the scarring risks through structural reforms, improve the attractiveness of the economy, and last but not the least, modernize both markets by increasing capacity development, retraining employees, and also by strengthening the social protection system.
In this direction, one very strict recommendation, so to say, from the IMF going forward for Georgia is to focus on fiscal consolidation, and IMF mentions that currently Georgia has very small room for fiscal adjustments, so to say, and it recommends Georgia to look at the capital projects rather than social expenditures. Why is that? Because when we're talking about the labor market specifically, the logic might also be that capital projects bring employment opportunities, and this further boosts economic growth. So what is the logic behind the IMF's recommendation and then IMF's advice for Georgia?
Well, as you know, Georgia has implemented an important set of reforms that help Georgia improve its economic outcome. And in the context of the IMF supported programs, Georgia was able to improve several economic and financial indicators. The IMF recommendations are in the short term to strengthen recovery and maintain the support that has been provided to vulnerable groups, gradually unwind some of the measures that were introduced last year and this year in face of the COVID shock, and going forward through rebalancing of the fiscal policy to provide more support socially, as well as also strengthen the recovery. In addition to that, we believe accelerating structural reforms by improving business environment, increasing competitiveness of the state-owned enterprises, as well as also for some targeted investment projects that helps improve education, capacity development, and training. This will allow the Georgian economy to accelerate the recovery. Mind you that projections of recovery this year of 7% and next year of 5.5% are among the strongest for the Caucasus and Central Asia.
Yes, my question stems exactly from this outlooks. We see that this year the economy might grow 7.7% according to IMF, and then the economic growth slows again. And that's why it was my question, why capital projects and not some other measures that have also been introduced during the pandemic?
Yeah, let me clarify here, the recovery of 7%, it's a J-curve type of recovery, strong recovery, and on a medium term, levels of growth of 5.5% are higher than the average growth in the region, that are still very good level of growth.
Yes, and this 7.7% also, again, it's the base effect also plays some role here, right? Yes. Okay. Also on the corporate sector outlook, this is the first time after the first waves of the pandemic that we have seen written black on white such words, the elevated uncertainty. What is the reason for that, and why is uncertainty growing again?
Well, as you know, this crisis was a massive crisis that led to a shutdown of the global economy and affected many countries. Especially in countries we saw scarring risks for sectors where we have a high intensive contact, tourism sector, as well as also other service sectors. And in the case of Georgia, those sectors are important. In the beginning, our recommendations for countries were to provide support to economy in order to save lives and livelihoods, and then gradually address issues related to flooring the economy to avoid massive scarring, and then gradually through monetary and fiscal to allow the economy to recover. This is what happened over the last year and a half. The acceleration of vaccination that we saw in the region and also in Georgia are steps in the right direction. Going forward, where the priorities are. One is to balance between strong recovery, but also to address the transformation of those economies, including the Georgian one, in order to, on one hand, maintain and address the risks that we saw over the last year, but also to strengthen the recovery. Therefore, on that, fiscal has gradually to normalize by unwinding as the recovery is strengthening, to unwind in order to reduce also risks on inflation. Structurally reforming SOEs, modernizing infrastructure also are important steps in accelerating the medium-term recovery.
Mentioning structural reforms, mentioning SOEs, we are waiting for another IMF program for Georgia. At this point, from what we know, the negotiations haven't yet started with the Georgian government. Do you think Georgia will have another IMF program?
Well, as you know, the authorities have signaled their interest in having another IMF support to their programs. The previous program has been successful. A mission will be visiting Georgia and discuss with the authorities. And we hope that in the beginning of next year, we will present to the board a potential program for Georgia.
in the beginning of the next year. And lastly, investing in the future to emerge stronger. What are some steps that countries need to take individually and I don't know, regionally together to invest in the future so that they emerge stronger out of this pandemic?
The pandemic crisis has showed us certain important developments. One, there are certain number of silver linings. Technology, green recovery are important opportunities for many countries to accelerate their recovery. In the case of Georgia and countries in the region, also the new global value chains, the opportunity of growing intra-regional trade and investment proved also to be an opportunity for countries to accelerate their growth. Of course, for that, what is needed is to have and to improve access to finance, access to opportunities, improving and modernizing labor market, building skills, continue the transformation of the economy through structural reforms, improve the performance of SOEs, as well as also increase the overall macroeconomic stability by maintaining inflation under control, as well as to the overall macroeconomy stable. Those are, I would say, for Georgia, as well as also for the region, some of the policy recommendations that the IMF consider would be useful for them going forward.
You say that for Georgia in 2021, the inflation will be somewhere around 13%. And then you say that starting from 2022, it will gradually come down to 3.17%, right? What should happen for such, say, sharp decline?
Well, as you know, inflation is global due to increase in food and commodity prices. We expect after the peak of 2021 that inflation will gradually globally normalize. Of course, this requires from monetary authorities, central banks to avoid de-anchoring of inflation expectations by maintaining appropriate level of interest rate, and when needed, increase interest rates in order to address the risk of spillover or the risk of de-anchoring of inflation expectations. And this is what the central bank in Georgia and in some other countries in the region have introduced in the last few months. If inflation is to become more challenging, additional measures would be needed.
What do you mean under additional measures?
Well, it depends on the nature of the inflation and the risks of the inflations. Those could be managed on the monetary side through interest rate, as well as also through the normal policy measures that are usually at the disposal of authority.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.